Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Lynn Bartley. I'll be your host for today's show. And I would like to reintroduce our regulars. Ron Kramer on my right, your left, who is the director of the Criminal Justice Program at Western Michigan University. And my left, your right, Don Cooney, who is a city commissioner and in the social work department and currently involved in some community activities, which we hope to talk about later. To begin with, we want to talk about the Boston Marathon, the bombing. Hopefully we'll be able to say some things about the role of the media, the role of the police, and the issue of blowback, which is a common term, Ron, that came from the books by
Chalmers Johnson.
Chalmers Johnson
was the one who really popularized the concept. It's actually a term from the CIA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are we thinking about that awful event?
Well, I think the first thing that has to be said is that it was an awful event. It was just horrific, and it's understandable why there would be so much emotion, fear, and anger to have an innocent event like this disrupted by a bomb, which was meant to create fear and terror in people. Just horrific, and so we want to state that first and foremost, right? And 3 people died, many people were seriously injured, a whole city was traumatized. So I think that needs to be said first. But I think we should also step back from the emotion of the moment and kind of analyze some of the other things that occurred with regard to the Boston Marathon bombing, because I think there were some other things that went on in connection with it that are disturbing and also a bit frightening, aside from the fear created by the bombs themselves. One, I think, is simply the way in which we then react so forcefully to these events, and they get so magnified in the public mind to the extent that it crowds almost everything else out, and all other kinds of threats also are in a sense diminished in comparison to the threat of a terror bombing like this.
Right.
So, there are so many other things that will injure and kill and hurt people aside from a rare bombing like this that we pay so little attention to, right? Mm-hmm. There's so many other issues and threats, just driving down the highway for one thing, or exposure to toxic substances in the environment, or there's just 100 other things that are more costly, more likely to injure and kill Americans, things that we ought to be concerned about, but we often don't show very much concern about, than a terror bombing like this, which is an extremely rare event. And again, despite the fact that yes, it was horrific and people were killed and injured, there are so many other issues and threats that can do the same thing that we don't pay any attention to. So because it's a terror bombing, it gets placed in a particular frame, right? This is where the media comes in, and the politicians come in. So it gets framed in a particular way so that it then becomes so magnified, and then the media attention is just 24/7, right? And the response is so overwhelming that it just crowds everything else off of our consciousness, off the media screens for that particular period of time. So just to contrast it, there was an explosion at the fertilizer plant in West Texas, which occurred just days after the bombing in Boston, and it killed many more people, and it devastated an entire community, and it appears to be the result of criminal negligence on the part of the fertilizer company, and also criminal negligence on the part of the state of Texas, which had not inspected that plant for 5 to 6 years. The corporation had been allowed to store this highly explosive substance, which they weren't supposed to have there, or if they did, they were supposed to report it, which they did not. And so again, here's this incident that results from criminal activity on the part of a corporation and a state government, kills more people, and yet it gets almost minimal attention in the media because of all the attention paid to Boston. There's not the huge police presence to find the culprits in this case and make sure that they're brought to justice. In fact, there have been no arrests made in this case to this point, and there probably never will be. And so again, I just wanted to compare and contrast that other threats like that, when corporations create conditions in the workplace or in the community that can result in harm, and we're going to be talking about that later in the program, that doesn't get the same kind of attention. It doesn't have the same feel to it as a, quote, terror bombing like in Boston, horrific as that was.
Yeah, I think, right, there's so many other issues that we're not really trying to solve the problems that this nation faces right now. And this is a distraction from dealing with the problems of unemployment, the climate change, the education terrible crisis that we're facing with young people not succeeding there and us falling behind the rest of the world. So it was horrendous. What happened there was horrendous. The other thing is we need to step back and say, why did this happen? What were the things that led up to it? I mean, did we learn anything from 9/11? Did we learn anything? Or was there nothing to be learned except that they hate us? Why? Why do they hate us? I mean, I think that's a question that the country really needs to ask themselves. Why is it that there are people out to destroy? Is there anything that we're doing that would prompt people to take these desperate measures? We haven't asked ourselves that as a country, and I think we need to.
Well, we're not allowed to ask that question. I mean, in a sense, in the political arena, it would be death to any politician, political death to any politician to even broach that subject. And in the media, it's almost completely verboten as well, right? You just can't go there. It's considered to be unpatriotic, it's considered to be radical and extremist to even raise that question. It's like, how dare you suggest that? And again, I think we need to be very clear. If one raises that question of why it happened, that doesn't in any way condone the action.
Of course not.
This was a horrible crime, and the people that perpetrated it deserve to be punished to the full extent of the law, and it doesn't justify or excuse what they did. But nonetheless, we still should be able to ask questions about why they did it. And if we're not able to ask that question, if it's not politically possible to even raise that question, then we're really going to miss out, because if there are certain conditions that keep producing people like these two brothers who want to do harm to us, and we don't understand and analyze the real motivating factors behind it, then it's going to keep happening, right?
Right.
And so this is where I think, and by the way, I want to salute Tom Brokaw, the retired NBC newsman, because he did raise this issue. Sort of a Walter Cronkite moment, I guess.
Yeah.
Cronkite, remember, was the first
Vietnam.
in the mainstream media to raise the whole issue of what's really going on in Vietnam, which up to that point nobody could touch, right? But because Uncle Walter did it, it somehow gave it a little bit more play in the media. And maybe Tom Brokaw, because of his reputation as a news person, will maybe allow this conversation to happen. I think it's a necessary conversation. But what Brokaw was saying was, is this blowback, right? We used that term earlier in the show. Blowback was a term coined by the Central Intelligence Agency to talk about when the United States engages in certain actions in the world that might upset or rile up or anger people, and then they seek to come back against us, or we engage in some action which we don't anticipate is going to have that kind of reaction, and then it does come back, in a sense, to haunt us or to bite us or to affect us. They refer to that as blowback. And that's been picked up. Chalmers Johnson, who wrote a tremendous book predicting. The first book that he wrote was the book called Blowback, or Talking About Blowback, which he wrote in 1999. And if you look at that book, he pretty much predicted what was going to happen on September 11th, not the date and not the specific incident, but he basically said our involvement in the Middle East, our military involvement in the Middle East after the first Iraq War, is creating the conditions which are angering many people in that region. And there perhaps will be consequences for that. We had set up radical Muslims in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, to help drive the Soviet Union out there, which good, we gave the Soviets a black eye, but we also created Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and the Taliban. We created those forces, which then turned back on us eventually. And the main factor for Osama bin Laden had always been the fact that there were troops, U.S. troops, in Saudi Arabia, in what they considered to be the Holy Land, right? This was the most grievous offense. And there were other grievances, and again, whether these are legitimate grievances or not, or whether we agree that they should be acted upon in the way they were acted upon. We're not giving any justification or excuse to Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden, but we do need to understand perhaps why they acted the way they did. And in this case, it was the presence of U.S. troops and the intervention in the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and there was a whole list of grievances that Osama bin Laden listed. And so then when the September 11th attack occurred, this was the blowback that Chalmers Johnson had pretty much predicted was going to be coming. But again, because of the horrific nature of 9/11, again, there was no discussion allowed of why this might have happened other than they hate us, right?
Right.
So there had to be some kind of, we were innocents, we're simply minding our own business, and out of the blue, for reasons unique to this group of people over there, they decided to attack us. And so it kind of mystifies the whole thing. Why would these people hate us so much that they would undertake this kind of attack? Well, they hate us because of our values, because of our freedom. This was the line that was sort of spinned by the Bush administration. And again, it's just not right. It's not true. And again, if we don't really understand the true underlying causes of why these terrorist attacks occurred in 9/11 and this latest one with these two brothers, then we're missing an opportunity to prevent such things from happening in the future.
The other thing is to jump on the idea that it's these are Muslims, and it's the responses that we get, the terrorism that we get, is from Muslims. But actually, a study's been done, a couple studies have been done, that showed over the last 20 years, 2/3 of the terrorist activity that's been done in the United States has been done by white males. And that's important to put that in perspective too, where this whole thing is coming from. I think that's...
It was interesting, right after the bombing in Boston, there was a lot of speculation. Is this going to be a Muslim terrorist attack by foreigners? Is this going to be a right-wing, homegrown militia attack? And there was a lot of speculation going around by everyone as to who the identity of the culprits would be and what affiliation they might have. So it's interesting. It's also, I think, important to point out that there has been a massive study done of suicide bombing in particular, that particular act of terrorism. And Robert Pape, who's a political scientist at the University of Chicago, has created this enormous data bank of all the suicide bombings around the world, the main form of terrorism. And his conclusion is that the greatest single cause of terrorism, of suicide bombing attacks, is foreign occupation.
Really?
The foreign occupation, the perception that some foreign military is occupying the homeland or some sacred entity, and that whether we're talking about Sri Lanka, or we're talking about what happened at 9/11, or we're talking about what happens in Israel and Palestine, that foreign occupation of one kind or another is almost always the major leading cause of suicide bombing, suicide terrorism. So
interesting. I think too, I don't know, the enormous inequality that exists in the world. I mean, how could people not resent the tremendous wealth of this nation when there are other nations where people are, I don't know, I guess it's a 1.25 million or 2 billion people living on less than $1.25 a day, but then contrasted with our wealth. And the idea that we don't have any responsibility to try to redress that, to try to act in the international economic system, to try to bring everybody up to at least some kind of a decent life. That must play into people's feelings toward the United States, I think. And then I think that what happened in Bangladesh is a good example of that, where that factory collapsed, 400 people killed, and they were making clothes for American people that could be sold cheaply. And that's the price of us buying those cheap clothes. And that has to resonate with people around the world, that how come that they can live like that and we live like this, and that continues. And those policies that we have that lead to those terrible disasters. I read in the New York Times that if we increase the price of clothes, of one garment, 10 cents, on all the garments that were produced over there, that would bring enough money in to make all those buildings where those factories are in Bangladesh safe. And we don't do that for 10 cents a garment. Mm-hmm. Who wouldn't resent that?
You know, I was given by a friend at church, Thomas Friedman's article in the New York Times called Judgment Not Included.
I read that.
And I was so struck with the sort of aristocratic view that he had. And here are just a couple of things that struck me. He said, rather, officials said that the evidence so far suggested that they were self-radicalized through the internet sites and U.S. actions in the Muslim world. Now, what does it mean to be self-radicalized? I think what that means is they probably read broadly. They probably increased their knowledge about the foreign policy of the United States and learned something about an inequity. Mm-hmm. Now, if that's called self-radicalization, then we ought to be letting the danger whistle blow in terms of the kinds of things, the way we'd like to see people educated. Then he goes on to say that of course, the brothers are angered, presumably by this. He says, but what in God's name does that have to do with planting a bomb at the Boston Marathon and blowing up innocent people? It is amazing that to me how we have come to accept this non sequitur and how easily we have allowed radical Muslim groups and their apologists to get away with it. So he doesn't like they're getting away with it. So he thinks they're getting away with some. So here's what he suggests. A simple question. If you are upset with the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, why don't you go out and build a school in Afghanistan to strengthen the community and get an advanced degree to strengthen yourself, or become a math teacher in a Muslim world to help its people be less vulnerable to foreign powers? Saying nothing about the way in which the foreign powers interrupt or prevent the very thing he's talking about from happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I just found it so arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
That he would presume that is an answer to the problem.
No analysis of the structural situation that leads to people living in incredible poverty. And again, the answer is charity, not justice.
Yes.
That will reach out and will give some stipend or something, a dime or something, when the reality is the system works to the advantage of the people that are successful and totally against the people at the bottom.
Right.
Horrible.
It just eliminates their possibilities.
Right.
And then condemns them for not taking advantage of the presumed possibilities.
And then the question is, if that's real, and it certainly is real, then what is the responsibility of this most powerful country in the world to deal with those structural injustices? And are we taking any steps to try to change those structures, to make them so that everybody could succeed to achieve a decent human life? And I think that's what the heart of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Another troubling aspect of all this is that, of course, it's absolutely horrible that innocent people get bombed.
Yes.
But when we look at our foreign policy, very often our foreign policy does rely on the use of military force that does end up killing innocent people. And we need only to look to the drone warfare that's going on in the Afghanistan, Pakistan border regions or in Yemen to see that the method of choice that the Obama administration, first the Bush administration, now the Obama administration, have decided to use to react to those forces that don't like our presence in Afghanistan, right, is to use the unmanned aerial vehicles, the drones, and to try to target and assassinate people that are thought to be participants or leaders in the resistance movements there. And when we do that, we inevitably kill innocent people.
Right.
And it's hard to actually calculate, but we've probably killed well over 300 innocent civilians in these drone attacks during the Obama administration. And so again, here we are talking about the horrific nature of bombing innocent people, and yet we don't make the connection that our bombs are also killing innocent people over there in far greater numbers, which leads to the anger and the blowback than the bombs that occur in the Bostons of the world. So there's sort of a total disconnect by Friedman and others about what role we play in the global political economy and what role the U.S. military and military violence plays in helping to maintain those inequitable conditions, and how that does lead to the anger and resentment, which leads some people like these two brothers to do what they did, which is, again, completely unjustifiable and a criminal act. But again, we're trying to get to the understanding of the motivation without justifying the action itself.
It's the wrong response. But the reasons for being upset with the United States are very valid, very valid. But that's the wrong response. You know, I ran the Boston Marathon twice, and I could picture exactly what was going on there, because I remember coming to the end of that race and how exciting it was when you're finishing, because you're totally spent. You better be totally spent, because you got to give it everything you got, and then to have that horrible thing happen, and just. It's just, but unless we start changing our foreign policy, we can expect more of those things to happen, I think.
I think, unfortunately, that's true, yeah. And I think we're probably running out of time during the first half here, but
we're doing fine.
Just one other important point, I think, is also the way in which we then react. And in a sense, if you think about it, what led to the capture of the two brothers was the fact that we had a lot of surveillance video, which allowed us to identify them, see them place the bombs and everything, and allowed them to be identified. And then, of course, the massive manhunt that went on. And then when the one brother was finally captured, then there was all the discussion, should he be dealt with as an enemy combatant, not given his Miranda rights, and all these other issues come up. And so, and we saw this, of course, with 9/11 and in the entire era that we've talked about this kind of terrorism. There's the sense that we have to treat this differently, that it's not like any other kind of crime, and that we don't have to follow the Constitution as we deal with these people. That, again, they're enemy combatants, and that somehow places them outside of the protection of the Constitution, and we don't have to follow our normal procedures. And therein, I think, also lies a danger that, you know, in order to protect the Constitution, we then defy the Constitution, and we don't trust the strength of our judicial system to determine the truth and to administer the proper punishment to the offenders based upon proper legal procedures and due process. We don't. You know, so when Lindsey Graham says we can't, you know, don't read them their Miranda rights, you know, he's not trusting the Constitution. He's defying the Constitution, which requires that we do this, right? And he's saying, you know, we have to treat this entirely differently. And I think there's a real danger there that we will become so fearful of this kind of terrorism that we will tear down our own constitutional system and our own system of due process in order to be safe. And if you give up liberty for safety, you probably end up with neither. I think, didn't Benjamin Franklin say that?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. I think that's a real danger, that the loss of civil liberties. And you can see it's more and more restricted when our civil liberties. And there's more and more of police going after innocent people and disrupting their lives, and I just think that we have to really look at what we really value in this country, and our freedom is important. Now, we have to be safe. There's no question we have to be safe, but it's got to be a long-term look at what really keeps us safe, And we're not safe if we're exploiting people in other countries.
Yeah, and I think the definition of who is safe becomes critical, because our sense of discriminating along a whole class order operates in terms of who we give protection to, who we don't give protection to, who is seen as acting suspiciously and who isn't. I mean, we've got the New York situation with more people being stopped and frisks than people of color than there were people of color in the city. So that if that's what it means to be safe, then only certain groups are safe. And if only certain groups are safe, then does that mean our Constitution only applies differentially to some and not to others?
What's security? For a lot of people, security is having a job that pays a living wage and having access to the things that they need for themselves and their families. That's security. Whereas the whole definition of security becomes, we got to have an enormous military force, we got to have an enormous police force, and the resources that would lead to jobs and these other kinds of things are diverted into this military state and police state that we're approaching, I think.
Right.
And maybe the American people would choose those things, but we don't have an open, honest discussion about making choices to do this. We don't have an open, honest discussion about, okay, we want to have a strong military presence in the Middle East because we want to maintain access to oil, and we want to protect the state of Israel, and we have other geopolitical interests that we're trying to protect, and so therefore we're going to have this strong military presence. That means we're going to be upsetting a lot of people and killing innocent civilians through drone attacks. But here are the reasons why we're doing it, and so Americans have to choose. Is that what we want to do? Is that the foreign policy that we want to have? Do we want to participate in the global political economy in this way, and therefore we know there are certain risks inherent in that? Will we accept those risks? But nobody's had that discussion or made that choice. The same with the civil liberties issue. Again, it could be presented very starkly. Do you want to be protected from these brothers and other people that might do this? Well, that means you have to give up constitutional protections, and you have to be surveilled, and you have to allow the police to wiretap, and you have to allow all kinds of other invasions of our civil liberties. But maybe Americans would choose to do that. But again, it's not presented to them in that particular format, that there are trade-offs here, that to be absolutely safe from terrorism like this means we have to give up a lot of other things over here in terms of civil liberties and living in a surveillance society. And again, maybe Americans would choose that, but it seems to me that we haven't had an open, honest discussion and debate about the choices to act in those particular ways.
I think there's evidence from all over the place. I think mostly in terms of the union movement and whose freedom is being protected. Is it the freedom of the people who own the means of production, or is it the freedoms of the people who are working? And historically, we know that it's the people who own the factories who have the protection. It's not the workers.
That's right.
They have to fight for those.
And so much of our foreign policy is based on... Go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, the foreign policy is based on protecting multinational corporations that are operating in other countries and huge expenditures on them. So we don't have the debate. If we would have had the debate honestly around gun control, 90% of the American people think there should be background checks. But we don't have that kind of a debate.
Well,
we don't have the debate, but we also have then certain sort of cultural narratives and stories that obfuscate and cover up the underlying forces that are really operating. So here we get the narrative, well, they hate us for our freedoms, and they're just irrational Muslims who, because of their religion, are going to attack us no matter what we do. So you get those kind of cultural stories to kind of fill in to overcome the lack of the discussion and debate.
Oh, we have another story we're going to go into, and in just a moment we're going to be joined by our guest. And so we're going to take a very brief break and be back in just a few minutes.
In the light of the comments, what they're going to do. And they were going to bring that their final proposal to us at the end of April, but they've delayed that now because of the activities in the community. So our solution, as Chris said, is get those things out of here.
Absolutely.
The whole thing, complete removal. So what were they saying it was going to cost to take them out of here, Chris?
Which time?
What's the latest thing that they're saying?
The latest they gave us was approximately 336 million. Was that it? In that ballpark?
Yeah. And we found another company.
Yes. The environmental quality company, I believe in Warren. They have given us the estimate of 97.6 million.
Plus, when they do the whole, add everything they have to add on, it's 116 million.
Right.
Which is about a third
Right.
of what they were saying it was
Absolutely.
going to be. And they can't say that this is a company that's not able to do this because they just hired this company 2 years ago to take the stuff out upstream from where we are. So they know it's a reputable company.
Right.
And they do all this kind
And
of stuff.
isn't there a site over near Bel Air,
That's
Michigan, that's a very well-designed site? It's away from most of the residential areas, and it's got the proper clay lining, and it would be a better site to dispose of these PCBs, right?
I believe that's their site.
That's
And
their site.
that's
That's
their
the EQ site.
Yeah, that's their clay
Okay,
pit.
so that's where they took the stuff from Plainwell, where
Yeah,
they
yes,
trucked
yeah,
it over there.
That's right.
But they didn't want to truck this stuff out of Kalamazoo over there.
The amazing thing is that there are 6 approved sites in the country. The nearest one, besides the one over there by the airport, is 450 miles away. But when they sent out proposals, requests for proposals, they did not send one to EQ.
Nope.
Even though EQ was less than 150 miles away, and the other one was 450 miles away, they did not send a request for proposal to EQ. So the message is they didn't want to take that stuff out of
Absolutely.
there. They just didn't want to do that. Yeah. So what's going on, Chris? Are we just saying, okay, well, thank you, we'll do that, it's fine, cover it up.
That would be the easy choice. But we have to live here. We have families here. We have children here. And I don't believe we desire to have toxic waste in our homes. So we are organizing the community. We are rallying together as a community to speak out to the federal government about this injustice that we are facing. And we will not stop until we have full removal of these PCBs.
Yeah, there are several different things that we're saying. One thing that we're saying is, does it make any sense to have a toxic, poisonous waste dump in the middle of a neighborhood?
Right.
I mean, there are dumps, as you said, Ron, there are places where it's appropriate to put these things. But in the middle of the neighborhood, in the middle of the biggest neighborhood that we have in Kalamazoo, which on one side is bordered by a middle-class neighborhood at Homecrest Circle, which comes right to the fence. I lived there for 22 years, so I know how that is. And on the other side is a lower-income community. A lot of African Americans, a lot of Hispanics in that community, right adjoining on the other side. And then right up to the fence is a senior citizen residence with low-income senior citizen, all HUD apartments right there. That's where they want to leave that. In addition to that, we get our water from groundwater.
Yeah.
And there are 2 of our largest aquifers proximate to this site. Now, what the EPA claims is that PCBs do not migrate. They say that they will not, when we cover it, they're not even going to put a cover underneath it. They're just talking about putting a cover over the top. But they say, well, that they won't migrate. And we say when terrible rains come, and it's hard to believe that they're not going to leak out of there and leak towards our aquifers. They say, well, we will monitor that for 10 years. And actually, we won't monitor it, they said. The EPA says, we're going to give $3 million to the state. $3 million to monitor that site for 10 years. $3 million isn't a lot of money to be monitoring that site, for number one. But even if that worked, what happens after 10 years?
Yeah.
Who's in charge of that then? Is the city in charge of that?
Right.
Are we going to be responsible for getting that stuff out of there at 116, which will probably be like $200 million at that time? And they're violating their own code, their own principles, because for the a Superfund site, one of the requirements is they have to have a permanent solution. What they're proposing is not a permanent solution. There's a question of environmental justice here. What does having a toxic waste site do to the property values of the people in the area? What does it do to our city, who already has more than 40% of our land mass tax exempt, to have this 48 acres that we can't use for anything at all? It doesn't make any sense. It's a violation of common sense, and it's also a violation of justice. So what's our strategy, Chris?
Our strategies, we're going to do research. We're creating a message. We will outreach to the community, and we will continue this fight. We will take it to, I believe we have some conversations with some legislators in D.C. I just recently talked to Senator Carl Levin's staff in D.C. last weekend, and put a little message in his ear about the PCB situation in Kalamazoo. So we are trying to lobby politicians to support us in our efforts, and we are hopeful that justice will be done. Right.
The EPA are the ones that have to make the final decisions, but we know that the EPA is interested in how much money they have and how much money they're going to allocate to that. So what really has to happen is that our federal officials, Senator Levin, Senator Stabenow, Congressman Upton, have to get involved in this issue. And they have to put pressure on the EPA to do the right thing. So Chris was in Washington and spoke to Levin's office. We will be sending a delegation from the city next week to Washington. Mayor Bobby Hopewell and our chief engineer, Bruce Merchant, at least those two, will be going to meet with Levin and Stabenow and Congressman Upton. And we are hopeful that we will have a joint letter from them to the EPA, which will pressure them to do the right thing here. We're already seeing some results from our organizing. We had a gathering last Monday night. Lynn, you were there. We had over 200 people.
It's amazing.
At that meeting. And the next day, the Environmental Protection Agency from Chicago called us and said they would like to meet with us in Chicago. They do not want to meet with us in Kalamazoo. They do not want to come to Kalamazoo for fear of the welcoming party that they would receive when they come here. So they invited us to come to Chicago, and we're going to go this week. Mayor Hopewell, Bruce Merchant, and they invited us to bring the people from the Environmental Quality Company with us to Chicago. In addition, they said they wanted to have a further meeting about some of the additional issues beside removal or capping. And they wanted to have that on a neutral site between Chicago and here, not in Kalamazoo. They don't want to come to Kalamazoo.
You scared them, Chris.
Hey, whatever it takes.
So what are we planning? We have a big event coming on May 15th. What's that all about, Chris?
We are going to have a community event to rally the community together and bring awareness to this issue. We're going to have some music. We're going to have a direct action, and we will be meeting at the site so everybody is familiar with the location also.
Right. So on May 15th, which is a Wednesday, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to meet in Homecrest Circle. We're going to gather there, and we're going to march along Portage Road and down past the senior citizen residence to the site,
Yes.
where we will have a massive rally. And Chris is saying we're going to have some music, we'll have some speakers, and we'll have we're hoping to get it on live at 5, and get as many folks out there as we can. When we did the demonstration when they were going to dump the things there 5 years ago, we had over 300 people at that rally, and we want to top that this time.
Absolutely.
So, May 15th, put that on your calendar, everybody.
Where's Homecrest Circle? Down for somebody
Homecrest Circle, if you were going south on Portage Street, you pass Miller Road. On your right-hand side is going to be the Upjohn Nursing Home.
Right.
The next right-hand turn takes you into Homecrest Circle.
Okay.
And that's where we're going to start,
where you're
because
gonna
these are the
gather.
people most directly affected by the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah. So we're ordering signs. How many signs are we getting?
A couple thousand.
Yeah.
Should do it.
A couple thousand signs. And the city has already contacted some environmental lawyers. So the city is not just talking.
Right.
We're going to put some money behind this.
Right.
Because we really feel this is so important to the people in our community. And we have a responsibility to our people. And we're going to do everything we can. So we're all in. The city's all in for this. We're going to fight hard for this. And I think we've got the makings of really winning this. And it will be a great win for the city.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It just seems like a stunningly stupid move on the part of EPA. I mean, you know, it just, as you said, it doesn't make any common sense. It just seems to be a totally outrageous and stupid decision. So where does this come from? I mean, what's the EPA? I mean, is it just trying to save money for the agency? Is that the main issue here?
Here's the big deal, really. You know, when the companies went bankrupt, they set up a trust fund. And they've spent a lot of the money that was in that trust fund. They won't even tell us how much money is left in the trust fund. But it's not a lot of money. They say, well, we have $50 million from that trust fund that we could allocate to this place. Actually, the proposal that they suggested would have only cost $36 million. But they have another $50 million in there that they're holding on to that they might want to use at another site. We're saying it doesn't make any sense to do that. You can use that money. And are you telling me that there's no other money any place in the EPA to get this out of a neighborhood? It's hard for me to believe that. It just doesn't make any sense. As my colleague David Anderson said, who would think it was a good idea to leave a toxic waste dump in the middle of a neighborhood near two of the city's leading aquifers that provide water for 50,000 people? Who would think that's a good idea?
Yeah.
The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, it doesn't make any sense.
Whose
at all.
major customer happens to be a university that has, has 30,000 people in it most of the year.
Absolutely.
And we are asking Western to get involved in this. We're asking Western to support us with a letter. We're asking the major hospitals in the city to support us with letters, and the major institutions around the community, because they got a stake in this too, and so that's what we're trying to get going here. We're also looking at the state, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Public Health. We want them involved in this issue. We got them involved last time, and we're going to try to get them involved this time. So that's our struggle. That's what we're battling. You've been to several of the meetings. What are you thinking?
Well, I think it's moving along. I missed the last one because of a family commitment, but I think it's moving along. I was absolutely pleased to see the number of people that came out, the quick establishment of the committees and people leading the committees. I'm just amazed at how skillful and you know, how good they were at getting people signed up and organizing the committees. And as you were talking, I was thinking about my association with Howard Zinn, and his idea about the 3 R's: the refusal, the resistance, and the revolution. And I was trying to think, where are we in this path? And it sounds like the first thing is the answer to their question is no.
That's right.
Go on. So we're at the refusal stage right now and organizing for the resistance, and it sounds like there's going to be plenty of resistance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Revolution is next. You know, I was in on the meetings last time when they were going to bring those other PCBs here. And I like to tell the story because what happened was they had told us in the beginning, well, it's too late. We already made contracts with these trucking companies and we're going to start doing it. And we said, cancel the contracts. So they weren't going to do that, but we put such pressure on them that finally they agreed that the head of the EPA in Chicago, the head of the DEQ, and the head of public health in Michigan agreed to come to us in Kalamazoo on the condition that it would be a closed meeting, no press, and that they would only meet with well, it turned out to be the administrative committee, the mayor, the vice mayor, and myself on the administrative committee, the environmental people from the city, and the city manager. So there were about 7 of us in the room, plus those people. And we met at City Hall. But we found out when they were coming, and we paved the streets with signs that they had to walk through to come up to the meeting. And when they came to the closed-door meeting, I'm thinking of Bobby Hopewell, Hannah McKinney. Hannah was the mayor at that time. Bobby was the vice mayor. I'm thinking, oh, these guys are going to be soft, man. I'll be the tiger,
Right.
you know. But Hannah McKinney was the tiger, man. She tore into those people. So what are you trying to do to the city? Don't you understand what's going on in the city? I just sat back, man. I let those guys go at it, and Bobby then jumped in, and he was. So I didn't have to do much. And then when it came to my turn, I just said, I just want you to know, the first truck that comes down that street, there will be 300 people at the entrance, and right in front will be 80-year-old ladies with their walkers and their wheelchairs. And we will have every television program in Michigan out there to film it. A week later, they said they changed their mind. They weren't going to bring those things to Kalamazoo. So they know what to expect when they come down here. So we meet every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock at Goodwill. And as Lynn said, we have different committees. We have an outreach committee, we have a media committee, we have a strategy committee, and we have students from Kalamazoo College that are going door to door now with a petition, asking people if they will take a sign, and giving them the phone numbers of our elected officials, and asking them to contact our elected officials. And we're going to have a Saturday, I think it's the 12th, right before we do the big event, where we're trying to get as many people as possible to go door to door that Saturday, and just get as many folks as we can out there. So we're really moving on this. I think it's really coming along here too.
If people want to get a sign or participate, how should they? What should they do?
Call Chris. What's your number?
My phone number is 269-544-9630.
Say it again.
269-544-9630.
Yeah. So that's what we'll do it. And if anybody can come to the meetings, that would be great. Tuesday night meetings are really important. I really think this is an exercise in democracy.
Absolutely.
It's the voices of the people. And what struck me in the meetings is the cross-section of the community that has come to this. Some very poor people from the area, the head of the Edison Neighborhood Association, some environmentalists, and
organizers, students.
And people that have been involved in caring for the river and stuff.
I think that's one of the things that struck me was, it's like this is a kind of bureaucracy or democracy versus bureaucracy.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got the direct action of people who are being affected by this condition. On the other, you've got people who are removed from the immediate situation and who are trying to solve the problem as if it's a different kind of problem. And with this bureaucratic mechanism at work, I know one of the things that Chris, my wife, talked about when she went to these meetings over the years was that very often the meetings were organized in such a way so the very technical reports were given for the first 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, and then there was 20 minutes left over for comments from people in the community. And she was concerned that this kind of control of the way in which the meetings operate meant that the community was cut out. So democracy had 20 minutes, bureaucracy had an hour and 15 minutes, and that kind of baloney cannot continue and have the citizenry be happy with any kind of result.
Our strength is in how many people get involved in this whole thing. That's our strength.
Absolutely.
How many people involved and how strong their reaction is. That's what's going to make us win this whole thing. And so it's been great to see the people. And the people are empowered. The people can see that they got strength, that they got power, that they can make this happen. So it's been a great thing.
I think from my experience with this kind of thing, when people come out with those picket signs, when they create that kind of flash community, there is something that happens with their sense of being involved in change. And it creates, for some, I'm sure, it renews memories of the earlier fight and makes them feel like they're part of this community and that they're getting something done.
Yes.
And that is important for an ongoing process in which democracy does work, because people know that they have acted and fought and created a better situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's really great.
Just to put it in a little bit broader context, I mean, what we're talking about here is state corporate crime, okay? So we're talking about corporations that impose externalities, right? They dump their wastes, which affect the commons, the public, right? And then they have no responsibility for that. The government, the state, is supposed to force them to do something about the cost they're imposing on the community, right?
Yeah.
The government is supposed to engage in some kind of regulation. But over the last 30 years, we have stripped away in this country the whole notion that government has a responsibility to regulate corporate behavior. And so we end up with very weak and ineffectual regulatory agencies that have been stripped of their budgets, been stripped of their staff. This is the age of Reagan. This is what Reagan and Thatcher did, right? Worldwide with their policies, is to strip away the power of government to regulate corporate behavior. In this case, corporate behavior, which is imposing externalities on the common good, on the public sector in a very broad way. And so that's the larger context in which this is a microcosm of that larger struggle that's going on. It's the same thing earlier in the program, talking about the fertilizer plant explosion in West Texas, right? Again, corporation engaging in harmful behaviors, not regulated by the state. As a result, we have an explosion, we have dead and injured people. And so again, it's that notion that one of the proper roles of government is to protect people, to protect the commons, and to protect it against the imposition of externalities by corporations. That's part of the broader struggle that's going on.
Absolutely, and then the people end up with the burden, whereas the other people have got their money, they're out of here, and they're fine. But we end up with the burden, and that's exactly what shouldn't happen. That's what we got to be fighting. So.
We have 2 more minutes, and I want to get the message out about where to go, who to see, where to call.
Chris, and tell them what we got to do here.
Well, we're fighting for the American dream. We're fighting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and you can't have the latter two without the first. So this is an issue that is endangering lives in Kalamazoo. And if you need to get in contact with this movement, just contact me. My email is kris.mbah@fhckzoo.com, or you can call my phone number, my cell phone, my personal cell phone, at 269-544-9630.
We'll show up.
Absolutely. Or show up at the
May
meetings.
15th.
At May 15th, the action at
At Homecrest Circle.
and or the general Allied Site Task Force meetings at Goodwill at Tuesday on 7 o'clock.
And the May 15th is 5 o'clock.
5
Yes.
o'clock when May 15th.
5 o'clock.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, and where to call, again, if people want to find out more information, or a website where they can go?
Website is calrivercleanup.com, I think it is.
I'm not sure about
Or you can just call my cell phone number, 269-544-9630, and I'll direct you.
You're going to get a lot of calls.
I don't mind. I don't mind. I don't mind. I like to talk. I like to talk.
Well, it's wonderful to see the resistance that's developing to this, because it's such a egregious
Right.
action.
Great to see
Right.
people doing it.
Lack of action.
Stage 2 in the 3 R's. Refusal, resistance, and revolution.
Right
So
on.
we're looking at the
Right
third
on.
stage.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you for having
being, and Don and Ron, gosh, it's just wonderful to have these opportunities for this discussion and to be involved in this community. So
Absolutely.
we hope you'll tune in next time when we're back with critical issues and alternative views.